There are moments in homicide cases where you think this can't get any worse. And then it suddenly does.
Chief, has anything changed from when we talked last? No.
There are some people in the world who are so evil that nothing means anything other than their own pleasure.
I dropped to my knees. I told them my daughter is in that house.
Somebody's been murdered and a child is missing.
I never knew what hate was until that day.
Then it becomes even worse when they realize another possibility. Somebody took the child and killed the babysitter. The longer it takes to find her, the less likely it is that she'll be found alive. Every cop at that scene knows that. The child is probably in the hands of a murderer. It's June 22nd. It's 3:30 in the morning. We're in a small town in northern Minnesota, Bemidji, Minnesota. A call is received at the Emergency Response Center that a house is on fire. The fire department responds. The place is fully involved. They manage finally to put the fire out, but the house is destroyed. They see a mattress in the living room. They pull back the mattress.
Deceased female victim.
And they discover human remains.
My name is Rob Frake. I'm a former special agent with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. I remember exactly where I was at. I had an appointment at the VA clinic in Bemidji, but I received a call. There's a fire at Hillcrest Manor. There's a body inside.
On the way.
Frake at the time, he had never been around many homicide investigations. He didn't understand what he was about to see and do.
Hillcrest Manor is a relatively large trailer park on the north side of city limits. I worked with Agent Girardi a fair amount.
What we got?
I got one inside, deceased female.
Okay.
Special Agent Paul Girardi had extensive experience in homicide investigations. This place is gone, gutted, destroyed. So it's a mess, an absolute mess.
The initial facts that I received were there was a woman that was found inside, deceased.
Frake is informed that the deceased person who lives in this place is a 35-year-old woman whose name is Melissa Norby.
Her hands were bound. You can infer a lot of things from that, but it's pretty obvious that somebody killed her and they tried to light the place on fire to cover up any evidence at the scene.
Our suspect had put a bed mattress over her. And mattresses are treated to be fire resistant, which likely helped preserve her body.
Question becomes, was she die because of the fire, or did she die by other means? We assume this is a concealment fire of a homicide, but we don't know yet. So rather than get lost in what it could be, let's try to determine what it is.
The fire marshal noted an indication of an accelerant because glass is pushed out several yards from the trailer. They did find the gas can in the bedroom.
There is a possibility that it was just a completely random act, but that's highly unlikely. So we're going to be looking for things like a boyfriend, a neighbor. There's going to be some sort of connection.
Who does Melissa Norby know who might want to make her look like this?
She lived with her 12-year-old son, who was not at home at the time of the fire.
So Melissa has a child. He's not there because he's staying with a cousin whose name is Tuesday Colby.
The BCA came to my home to speak with me and her son, and they had identified Melissa's body, and it was really hard. Everything was very overwhelming. We were basically like sisters. We were extremely close. She loved to laugh, she loved to smile. When Melissa was 10 years old, she confided in me that an older man had sexually assaulted her, and it really took a toll on her. Ever since that day, she was different. When Melissa was growing into a woman, there was always an older man around who would take advantage of her sexually. Watching her constantly hate herself is the worst, because you can't make it better.
So Melissa's had her issues with men over time, and she dates people of less than sterling character.
Do you know of anybody that would have wanted to see your cousin killed?
There were a few characters in Melissa's life that I thought might know more.
I'm not quite sure. I just know they're acquaintances.
She says that she has a friend who lives in Bemidji, whose name is Larry Erickson.
Larry had apparently been in some sort of romantic relationship with our decedent. Larry agreed to come in and speak with us.
Just got a few quick questions for you.
Larry had told investigators that he was home all evening watching movies. He denied any contact with Norby, denied knowing about the fire.
Were you guys romantically involved?
No.
He denied any type of physical relationship with Melissa Norby, which was contrary to what we had learned earlier.
Erickson says she's been a good friend of his for some time. But we had a confrontation a couple months ago, and it's kind of damaged the relationship. Did you say confrontation? We like confrontations. So Frake is immediately interested.
He's in close proximity. He was up around the time that the fire started, and I thought Larry was looking really good as a suspect.
Larry, can I take a look at your phone?
You don't need to do that. Why would you need to do that?
And Larry proceeded to start destroying his phone.
Hey!
Well, now you have my undivided attention. What is in that phone that speaks to the death of Melissa Norby? Let's find out. What can be learned from this phone? Larry becomes so angry that he becomes physically aggressive toward Frake.
You kidding me?
The interview wasn't going well.
He'd started to physically destroy his phone.
You are clearly involved in some sort of activity you don't want exposed.
All right, we're done.
So we're going to find out. This phone is going to be examined for content.
Hey,
Hey, detective, come on in.
Frank checks back with the tech team. What's in the phone that's connected to this case? Well, it's not exactly connected to your case. What does that mean? He said photographs and video of him and his girlfriend in, shall we say, compromising positions. No, God. It's a personal porno collection? Is that what we're talking about? Yeah. Nothing of any value.
Larry ultimately alibied out and he wasn't involved.
It's definitely probably not our guy.
Okay. So now what sounded so promising, like it often does, collapses. While this is going on with Frake, crime scene investigators are still processing the scene. They examine the victim's car.
Find anything?
Bemidji investigators did find mail inside of Melissa Norby's car that gave a name of a person, Rob August.
We don't know why that mail is in the car. The reasonable conclusion is he's a friend, an associate. Investigators are questioning neighbors. Do you know a guy named Robert August? Oh yeah, I know Robert. We'd like to talk to him. Well, you better hurry up.
We learned that several hours after Melissa Norby's house burns down, this individual leaves town on a bus.
What are you doing that for, Robert? Are you getting away from what you've done?
Any investigation, it's always time is of the essence, so we wanted to find that person right away. We called the Cass County deputies. We said, we need you to stop the bus for us.
If someone truly is believing they're going to escape somewhere by riding a commercial bus, haven't given a lot of thought to this. The police, with one phone call, turns the bus into a holding cell. They stop the bus, and they recover Mr. August.
And he talked about his relationship with the victim. He was upset that the victim was deceased, but hadn't had a consistent relationship with her for some time.
So, Mr. August, why are you suddenly on a bus going 4 or 5 hours away?
He said he was leaving town for some medical treatments.
He has a perfectly reasonable explanation for his behavior. He has to go to this doctor, and that's where he's going. And Holden confirms all of this. August is out. He's not involved in this.
Miss Frake?
In the meantime, the investigators hear from the medical examiner the official cause of Melissa Norby's death: asphyxia. She is dead as a result of ligature strangulation. Ligature is anything applied to the neck to cause sufficient pressure to stop the breathing of the victim. As far as trace DNA, if heat alone won't destroy it, fire will.
At this point, we're getting several hours into the investigation, and we don't even really have anybody that we're looking for. Every hour that goes by, this person can get further and further from the scene.
I don't know if it was over the radio or if it was a phone call at the time, but I still get tingles.
A female came up to the crime scene, made contact with officers on scene, and she told them that her 5-year-old daughter had spent the night with Melissa Norby.
She's 5 years old. Her name is Brittany. Oh, God. Now we've gone from adult to child, for God's sake. Where is this kid? They have no idea. None. It's now noonish, the day following the fire, and here comes this distraught woman whose name is Amanda.
Brittany! Where's my daughter?
She's demanding to speak to someone in church.
My phone had rang. It was Tuesday, which is Missy's cousin on the other line. And she said, freaking out, please tell me it's not true. Tell me Melissa's house is not on fire. And I was like, Brittany is over there. What the hell are you talking about? I freaked out. I hopped in my vehicle and I made it over there in 5 minutes. All I really remember was me saying, please tell me that's not the house. I dropped to my knees. It was like, okay, that is her house. I told them, my daughter is in that house. Brittany is in that house. I've known Melissa since elementary school. We were inseparable. We grew up. Her son was my nephew, and my kids were her niece and nephews. Melissa and I would always take the kids to the beach, slumber parties, movies, just a lot of fun family time. Brittany is the baby of the family. Melissa was Brittany's aunt, just like a second mom. Brittany would light up every time Missy would say, hey, do you want to come over and spend some time with me?
She goes on to explain that it's common for Brittany to spend the night with Melissa Norby in this trailer.
Melissa had called me at like 9 o'clock at night. Do you mind if I take Brittany? She said her son is with Tuesday.
Well, where is Brittany now? The investigators do a thorough search of the remains of the house. They find no evidence of any other human remains. They do a thorough search of the area. No result. The child is not here.
When you get information that there's a child missing, that's what knocks the wind out of you.
Then it becomes even worse when they realize another possibility. Somebody took the child and killed the babysitter. The longer it takes to find them, the less likely it is that she'll be found alive. Every cop at that scene knows that.
She was close to the age of one of my children. You start thinking about how scared your kid would be. I think that mom instinct just kicks in no matter what.
So now it's all hands on deck. Nobody's going anywhere until we find this kid. And who's responsible for this? The focus must remain on associates of the adult victim.
So as I was going through Melissa's phone records, I was looking for anything that maybe stand out that wasn't a local number. Every hour that goes by, this person can get further from the scene. This child could be anywhere in the United States almost, including up in Canada.
Where have we not dug yet? It has to be somebody that knows about that child. It's somebody close. So how do we find somebody close? They dispatch agents to Tuesday Collerby's house, and they talk to the son.
Do you know if your mom was seeing anybody in particular?
They ask, is there anybody your mother has been recently seeing? And he says, yes. Well, who might that be?
And he's like, it was chance.
Chance.
Chance?
Chance.
And I was like, chance?
Well, they call him Chance, but that's not his real name. The kid says, I don't trust him.
Now, Chance isn't his real name. She called him Chance because in her world, he was her last chance at love.
Toward the end there, she was secretive about guys because I didn't approve of half the guys she would be with, and her cousin really didn't care for them either.
Melissa continually made poor choices about love and about her own self-respect. And clearly in Melissa's case, it was a weakness.
We immediately thought, well, why is she not using his real name? Is he married? Like, why are we not seeing him in her social media? Because we're several hours into this investigation, and we have a pretty good handle on who she's talking to online. And he's nowhere to be found.
And then her son said, yeah, he has a food truck.
There's not a lot of food trucks around here. Well, let's make a call to the city clerk, figure this out.
I remember I was at the law enforcement center when the food truck information came back.
Okay, listen up, folks.
It was later in the evening. We were in a briefing. So I remember it was like, the hairs on your back of your neck stand up.
City clerk said, yeah, there's a new food truck in town. It's Jake's Eats, owned by Jacob Kent. It's one of those moments in your life that you'll never forget where you were standing, what the room smelled, heard, and felt like, and it got quiet. Oh my God, Jacob Kent. Well, we all knew who Jacob Kent was. He was on probation for a sex-related offense. He was one of those guys that would be fully capable of kidnapping a girl.
He is the guy. He's the guy. Even if you haven't seen him yet, you just somehow know it. Investigators are looking at the record of 32-year-old Jacob Kent. He is currently on probation for possession of child pornography. He is friends with a woman who's now dead, who had a child in her possession, and now the child is missing.
It just seemed so obvious once his name came up. Of course, this would be him. Why are we looking for all these other suspects? Well, he should have been suspect number one.
It is always the case in investigations. You're going to get the wrong guy in your sights. But when you get the right one, that's when you can feel it in your bones.
I talked to Mom and Dad that evening. They were distraught.
My emotions were like everywhere because, well, I lost my sister and then my daughter was gone.
So early evening on June 22nd, we went to Jacob's residence. Pretty rural area, almost an off-grid type cabin. He'd left. We walked around the property.
Hey, Holden. Look.
There were some pretty obvious indicators this person might be it. There's a spot of dead grass next to other gas cans, which surely indicates that he got a gas can from right here at his house and used that to light the arson fire of Melissa Nordby's home. It's pretty damning evidence, however, no little girl.
The search for Brittany has continued as day becomes night.
At that point, everybody's out running leads. They're literally doing everything they can to figure out where this little girl might be, where Jacob Kent has been for the last 24 hours.
Hello.
The probation officer reaches Jacob by phone and he tells him to report to police headquarters right now.
He did not make it to the law enforcement center till midnight.
When he arrived, we noticed on his vehicle there was tall grass hanging underneath it. Looked like it had been driving through a field. Jacob Ken's feet and pants were also wet. Again, we'd got a ton of rain. Your feet and pants don't get wet if you're walking in a parking lot after rain, but they would get soaking wet if you were walking through a field. He was interviewed by Special Agent Paul Girardi and Special Agent Chad Museus. Agent Girardi and Agent Museus are interrogators. Jacob Ken screwed up by stepping into an interview room with Chad and Paul.
Where'd you just come from?
Well, I was fishing up north.
After the probation officer called Jacob Ken, we were able to get the cell phone location.
Okay, fishing where?
Clear Lake.
Clear Lake.
Based on where his cell phone pinged, he was in Big Fork, 30, 40 miles away from Clear Lake, where he said he was.
Yeah, did you hear about the fire?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I do know that lady, actually.
And what's her name?
Melissa Norby.
Do you have any way to get a hold of her? Or?
No. I'll have her phone number here.
Ken is denying any type of relationship with Melissa.
Do you know the missing girl? Do you know her?
No.
Do you know her mom is Amanda?
No.
He denied knowing the little girl or ever having contact with the little girl.
Have you ever seen a little girl in person other than in a photo?
No.
He would give short one-word answers. He's pushed away from the table. He's sitting back with his arms crossed. He had some nonverbal body language that he was uncomfortable.
His responses to our questions made us not very optimistic. I was worried we wouldn't have a good outcome.
Jacob is being Mr. Innocent. Don't know anything about anything. That's pretty normal for a guy with experience in the system. You make no admissions of any kind. It's been almost 24 hours since the murder. And Jacob says, if you don't arrest me, I'm going home. We're not going to arrest you, Jacob. Not yet, anyway.
He was allowed to leave about 4:30 that morning.
We took his phone, we took his clothes, and we took his Jeep. His dad came and picked him up. He left angry, and we left there feeling as though we had a double murder.
We sent surveillance units out because now we knew where he was at.
Our perpetrator has 12 or 14 hours to decide what to do with his child. The statistics are overwhelming. The longer this takes, the less likely the outcome will be good.
At that point, we just really thought he brought her somewhere rural, and that the next morning we were going to begin trying to locate where he put her.
I came home and I remember I laid down on the cot and my oldest had been waiting for me to come home. And all she did was reach out and took my hand. So I fell asleep holding her hand, and that just intensified that we have to get this kid back, whether she's alive or dead, because I would want to know.
Detectives don't like investigating the death of a child.
Mm-mm.
Why? Why is it different?
I don't want to talk about that anymore. Too many memories creep back for me, my boy.
Myself and Senior Special Agent Don Newhouse got in his car to drive to Big Fork. We really needed more information on what he had done up in that area. We called Itasca County Sheriff's Office, our neighboring county.
It turns out his brother owns 40 acres of ground in Big Fork. What's up with that? What is drawing him to the 40 acres?
Jacob Ken could have put this little girl anywhere in northern Minnesota. Why would Jacob Ken put her on property that's deeded to somebody that shares his last name? And without missing a beat, Agent Newhouse explained that's controlled access. He's gonna go back. We had to do basically a map reconnaissance of the area. We had a specific gravel road in mind that led to the property, and when we pulled onto the gravel, I could see one set of tracks. At that point, we stopped, got out, and we continued to walk, following tracks, until we came to the top of a hill and we noticed a pickup camper parked along a wood line. We walked up and the doorknob was wrapped tight with electrical tape. I felt like one way or the other we were getting close.
They both know they're going to find that child one way or the other. The question is it the child or the child's remains?
I grabbed my shirt and kind of just pulled on the tape. And I flipped the door open. And there's a little girl sitting there on the bed. I'm basically in disbelief in what I'm seeing and trying to muster together the words.
Is it okay if I come in? Okay, you don't have to be scared, okay? We're the police. Okay, my name's Rob and this is Don. How old are you?
Probably 5 or something. My mommy's name is Amanda.
How do you feel watching that back?
Yeah, I've watched that video quite a few times. It's, you know, you get the same reaction every time. I don't know if a lot of folks realize really how hard some of these cases are.
There she is. Not the end of the story, but no longer necessary to search for Brittany because the police have her in their arms.
We got back to the car and I said, Don, take a picture and then send this out to the group.
I still get chills talking about it today, how many years afterwards. I can't almost physically describe that feeling.
I cried so hard in the car because I was so happy that she was alive and so, sorry.
I've had a great career. I've done a lot of really cool things. The outcome, finding our missing girl, definitely the best of my career. Definitely.
My phone rang, and he says, Amanda, we have your daughter. We have Brittany. And I said, please tell me she is alive. And he said, yes, she's alive. This picture actually is the reason I call them family. The Sheriff's Department, the BCA, everybody involved, they're family.
There's always moments in law enforcement that reinforce the idea why you took the oath in the first place. This is one of those days. Ken is wanted for murder and kidnapping. And now the whole state of Minnesota is looking for this creep.
We're setting up a perimeter near the camper where the girl was found because we know that's where he's gonna go. And that's where they find him, on the road back to the camper.
They find him sleeping in his father's truck.
Put your hands behind your back.
Being the criminal genius that he is, he decides it's more important to sleep in a vehicle that's being looked at by every policeman in the state of Minnesota. They bring him in. Here he is.
Jake, has anything changed from when we talked last? Nothing's changed from last night.
What changed between 2 hours ago and now, right?
He asked what changed from the previous night, and I showed him the picture of Rob and Brittany alive. His eyes kind of rolled back.
Now, start over. What do you got to tell us?
Now is the time, Jake. I do want an attorney. Okay.
Well, okay, Jacob. That'll still work. And you're being held without bond for first-degree murder, kidnapping of a minor child, and they lock him up. But what happened that Jacob decided to kill Melissa and burn her house down around her?
I remember the anger, the surprise, the frustration when we saw those text messages.
The technical service agent was going through the electronics, and he said, "Holy, you're not gonna believe what I found."
Jacob Kinn had basically demanded that Melissa get the little girl and bring her to the house the night that he decided to kill Melissa Norby. And Melissa Norby helped do that. And her actions directly resulted in this little girl's abduction.
Disturbing to the point of absolute shock. It is apparent from the texting that Melissa is part of the plot. Were she alive, she'd be in custody. But she's in a drawer at the morgue.
I could say that I would never have expected this from Melissa. She didn't always make the best choices, but I would never have thought she was capable of this. I'm really angry at her still.
I never knew what hate was until that day. It's like, how can somebody that you've known for 30 plus years do that to you?
Melissa Norby had the same problem that Jacob Kinn has. A twisted sexual desire that overwhelmed her judgment, her kinship with other humans, her friendships. All of it meant nothing. These people are scum. Both of them. As the case proceeds forward, Jacob decides to accept a plea bargain. Jacob stands up in court and he says, well, the plan was to kidnap the child and keep her as a sex toy for the two of us. Melissa also enjoys rough sex and edge games. In the alternative lifestyle, you bring someone to the edge of death to enhance their orgasm. He puts the belt around her neck in a manner of erotic asphyxia. Jacob says something went wrong and she died during this experience. When she dies, he panics and he throws gas everywhere, kidnaps the 5-year-old girl, ignites the place and runs away. So at the end of the day, Jacob Kinn gets 52 years in the Minnesota State Penitentiary. I would have handled that completely differently. If anybody needs a bullet, it's Jacob Kinn.
I'll never believe she died of an accident. I think all along the plan was to kill her.
Melissa didn't know she wasn't part of the long-term plan. She was going to be dead and burned, and Jacob was going to take the little girl.
For Brittany, it's hard for her to talk about what happened, but she makes it through. She's still the rock that she was. The way I parent now is I baby them because I never know if it's going to be the last day I'll see them. Parenting is really difficult now. That's what makes it hard as a mom. Sorry.
You do your best to separate what you're doing at work from your family life, and sometimes you just can't.
Is it okay if I come in?
The Mariana Trench is child's play compared to the depth of depravity in humans. Doesn't happen in Mother Nature, not in the animal kingdom. Humans are disappointing in so many ways. That's what makes them so dangerous.
At 2:17 a.m., the phone rang in a quiet Chicago apartment, the shrill sound slicing through the darkness like a blade, and in that instant, a single unanswered call became the first echo of a mystery that would stretch across 29 years, a cold case that refused to stay buried, a story that began not with a scream or a gunshot, but with silence, the kind of silence that creeps into a room and never quite leaves, settling into the walls, the furniture, the memories, until it becomes part of the air itself. Outside, February wind clawed at the streets, rattling loose windows and scattering old newspapers across empty sidewalks, while inside, the city slept, unaware that one of its countless ordinary nights had just become a date that would be whispered in police stations, courtrooms, and grieving homes for decades to come. In 1996, Chicago was a city of contrasts, towering skyscrapers casting long shadows over neighborhoods stitched together by hope, hardship, and survival, a place where ambition burned bright, but danger always lingered at the edges. The South Side pulsed with life during the day, children running through narrow streets, shopkeepers pulling up metal shutters, buses groaning under the weight of commuters. Yet when night fell, the same streets transformed, becoming corridors of uncertainty, where every echo of footsteps carried a question and every flicker of a street lamp hinted at unseen movement. It was here, in this restless maze of brick and concrete, that a young woman named Elena Morales vanished, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a family suspended in permanent waiting. Elena was 22, a community college student with a quiet determination that set her apart, the kind of resolve that came from growing up fast, from learning early that nothing was guaranteed and everything had to be earned. She worked evenings at a small diner near 47th Street, saving money for tuition, helping her mother cover rent, dreaming of a future that stretched beyond the narrow boundaries of her block. Friends described her as cautious but hopeful, guarded yet generous, a listener more than a talker, someone who absorbed the world carefully, as if aware that one wrong step could change everything. On the night she disappeared, she finished her shift just before midnight, wiped down the counter, tied her jacket tight against the cold, and stepped into the Chicago night, unaware that she was walking into the final moments anyone would ever see her alive. The last confirmed sighting placed Elena outside the diner, standing under the dim glow of a flickering neon sign, waiting for the bus that would carry her the 12 blocks home. Surveillance footage from a nearby storefront showed her checking her watch, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, glancing down the empty street as if sensing something she could not name. The bus never came. Or perhaps it did, and she never boarded. By the time the diner owner locked the door and pulled down the metal grate, Elena was already gone, swallowed by a city that rarely paused to notice the disappearance of one more young woman. When Elena failed to come home, her mother, Rosa, waited. At first, She told herself the bus was late, then that Elena had stopped by a friend's house, then that she might have taken on an extra shift to earn more money. But as the minutes stretched into hours, anxiety tightened its grip. By dawn, fear had settled in, heavy and immovable. Rosa walked the route Elena usually took, scanning sidewalks and alleys, peering into doorways, asking strangers if they'd seen a young woman in a blue jacket with dark hair pulled into a low ponytail. No one had. By mid-morning, she was standing inside a police precinct, clutching a recent photograph, her voice trembling as she reported her daughter missing. The initial response was routine, almost mechanical. Officers took notes, entered details into a system crowded with thousands of similar entries, and gently suggested that Elena might have left voluntarily, that young adults sometimes disappeared for a few days, that patience was necessary. But Rosa knew her daughter, knew her habits, her fears, her sense of responsibility. Elena would never leave without a word. She would never abandon her family. The idea cut too deeply to be dismissed. As hours turned into days, the case shifted from a missing persons report to a full-scale investigation, and the word cold case began its slow, inevitable drift toward the center of the story. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors, questioning shop owners, reviewing grainy surveillance tapes that revealed little more than blurred shapes and passing headlights. They interviewed coworkers, friends, classmates, anyone who had spoken to Elena in the days before she vanished. No one recalled an argument, a threat, or a reason for her to run. There were whispers of a man seen loitering near the bus stop, a dark figure in a hooded jacket who melted into the shadows whenever a car approached. There were rumors of a suspicious vehicle idling near the curb, its license plate obscured by grime. Each lead sparked a brief surge of hope, only to dissolve into dead ends, leaving behind the hollow ache of expectation unmet. 3 days after Elena disappeared, a passerby discovered her backpack in a dumpster behind an abandoned building 2 miles from the diner. Inside were her textbooks, her wallet, and her bus pass, neatly arranged, as if placed with deliberate care. There was no blood, no visible sign of struggle, nothing to indicate violence, yet the location told a different story. This was not a place Elena would have gone willingly. The discovery ignited a new wave of urgency. Forensic teams combed the area, sifting through trash, dusting surfaces for fingerprints, searching for fibers, footprints, any trace that might point toward her fate. They found nothing conclusive. The backpack became both a symbol of hope and a cruel reminder of absence, a tangible fragment of a life abruptly interrupted. As the investigation deepened, Chicago's media seized the story, splashing Elena's face across evening news broadcasts and front pages, her smile frozen in time, her eyes staring out at millions of strangers. Headlines spoke of a mysterious disappearance, of a young woman swallowed by the night, of a city once again confronted with its own dark undercurrents. Tips poured in, dozens each day, most vague, some contradictory, a few chilling. One caller claimed to have seen Elena forced into a van. Another insisted she had boarded a late-night train heading out of the city. A third swore she was alive, hiding from someone who meant her harm. Each call demanded attention. Each one carried the potential to crack the case wide open, yet every trail ended in uncertainty. Inside the Morales apartment, time seemed to freeze. Rosa left the porch light on every night, a silent beacon guiding her daughter home. Elena's room remained untouched, bed neatly made, textbooks stacked on her desk, a half-finished essay still glowing on her computer screen. The air was thick with anticipation and dread, each ring of the phone a jolt of hope followed by crushing disappointment. Family members took turns staying awake, afraid that sleep might steal the moment Elena finally returned. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months, and gradually, the rhythm of life reorganized itself around a single, unrelenting question: where was Elena? As leads dwindled, detectives began to confront the possibility that this case might never be solved. Evidence was sparse. Witness statements were inconsistent. Surveillance technology in 1996 was limited, producing images too grainy to identify faces or license plates with certainty. DNA analysis, still in its relative infancy, offered little immediate help. The city's homicide and missing persons units were overwhelmed, stretched thin by a relentless tide of violence and unresolved cases. One by one, resources were redirected, personnel reassigned, until Elena Morales became a name in a file, her story archived among hundreds of others, waiting for a breakthrough that might never come. Yet even as official attention waned, the community refused to forget. Candlelight vigils filled street corners. Flyers bearing Elena's photograph clung to telephone poles and storefront windows, fading under sun and rain but stubbornly replaced by fresh copies. Local churches held prayer services. Volunteers organized search parties, combing abandoned lots, riverbanks, and derelict buildings, driven by a collective determination to uncover the truth. Every discovery, a scrap of clothing, a broken bracelet, a patch of disturbed earth, sent ripples of anxiety through the neighborhood, each one ultimately resolving into another false alarm. The years marched forward, indifferent to grief. New buildings rose. Old businesses closed. Children who once played in the streets grew into adults with families of their own. But for the Morales family, time stood still, anchored to a single night in 1996. Birthdays passed without celebration. Holidays became exercises in endurance. Rosa aged rapidly, lines carving themselves into her face, her hair streaked with premature gray, her eyes carrying the weight of endless waiting. She became a familiar figure at police stations and community meetings, her persistence both admired and quietly pitted, a woman unwilling to surrender hope even when logic insisted she should. Behind closed doors, detectives revisited the case again and again, re-examining evidence, re-interviewing witnesses, following up on tips that trickled in long after the headlines had faded. Advances in forensic science promised new possibilities. Old files were digitized. DNA databases expanded. Cold cases, once thought unsolvable, began to yield secrets. Elena's file was reopened more than once, each time with cautious optimism, each time with the same result: more questions, no answers. The mystery deepened, its edges growing sharper, more unsettling with every passing year. There were moments when the case threatened to disappear entirely, buried beneath the weight of newer tragedies, yet something about Elena's story resisted erasure. Perhaps it was the clarity of her dreams, the ordinariness of her life, the way her absence carved a visible wound in the community. Or perhaps it was the unsettling simplicity of the moment she vanished, a reminder that in a city of millions, a single person could slip through the cracks without a sound. Whatever the reason, the case lingered, hovering at the margins of memory, waiting for the right spark to ignite it once more. By the time 2 decades had passed, the phrase Chicago 1996 cold case had become shorthand within law enforcement circles, a reference point for both frustration and perseverance, a testament to the limits of technology and the endurance of grief. New detectives, too young to remember the night Elena disappeared, studied her file with fresh eyes, tracing old leads, mapping connections that had once seemed insignificant. They saw patterns where others had seen coincidence, gaps where others had accepted uncertainty, and slowly, painstakingly, the contours of a long-buried truth began to emerge. But in 1996, none of that lay ahead. There was only the raw immediacy of loss, the frantic scramble for answers, the suffocating weight of not knowing. There was only a young woman stepping into the cold, a city that did not notice, and a family left standing in the aftermath, clinging to a hope that would be tested by time, by silence, and by the relentless march of years. And as the streets of Chicago swallowed the final echoes of that night, the story of Elena Morales settled into its uneasy limbo, suspended between memory and oblivion, waiting for the moment when the past would finally refuse to stay buried. The winter of 1996 tightened its grip on Chicago, and with it came a deeper chill, one that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the growing certainty that Elena Morales had not simply wandered off into the night, that something deliberate, calculated, and irreversible had unfolded in the shadows beyond the reach of streetlights and witnesses. As the city moved forward, Wrapped in scarves and routine, the investigation slipped into a quieter, more methodical phase, one defined less by urgency and more by endurance, the kind of slow-burning persistence that only cold cases demanded. Inside cramped police offices, detectives spread faded photographs across metal desks, replayed grainy surveillance footage until their eyes blurred, and chased rumors that twisted through neighborhoods like restless ghosts, refusing to settle. The bus route became a central obsession. Every stop, every alley, every intersection along Elena's usual path home was scrutinized, walked, measured, and rewalked. Drivers were interviewed, schedules rechecked, maintenance logs reviewed, all in the hope that some overlooked detail might emerge: a missed boarding, a delayed arrival, a malfunction that forced a detour. Nothing definitive surfaced. The buses had run late that night, as they often did in winter, but no driver remembered a young woman matching Elena's description. No passenger recalled a struggle, a scream, a moment of alarm. The night had absorbed her too completely, leaving behind only absence. Detectives turned their attention to the diner, the last place Elena was seen alive. They reconstructed her final shift minute by minute, questioning co-workers about her mood, her interactions, the customers she served. Most remembered nothing unusual. A few recalled a man sitting alone near the back, lingering over a single cup of coffee, eyes fixed on Elena whenever she passed. His description varied with each telling: tall, average, thin, heavy-set, yet a vague composite emerged, a solitary figure, unremarkable enough to fade into the background, memorable only because he stayed too long. No one knew his name. No one had seen where he went. The receipt for his order had long since been discarded, another small casualty of time. Outside, the alley behind the diner offered little comfort. Snow had erased potential footprints. Trash and debris masked any sign of a struggle. A security camera mounted above a neighboring storefront captured a narrow slice of the street, but the footage was plagued by static and flicker, reducing human forms to trembling silhouettes. Investigators enhanced, enlarged, and reprocessed the tape, coaxing out blurred shapes that hinted at movement, but revealed no identity. Every frame was dissected, every shadow interrogated, yet the images refused to yield their secrets. Attention shifted toward Elena's personal life, her friendships, her relationships, her routines. Her phone records were combed, revealing a small circle of frequent contacts: family members, classmates, co-workers. No mysterious numbers appeared, no late-night calls that suggested a clandestine relationship. Her diary, found tucked beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom, offered fragments of her inner world: concerns about money, anxiety over exams, fleeting hopes of transferring to a 4-year university, but nothing that hinted at danger. The absence of warning signs only deepened the unease. If there was no obvious threat, then anyone, anywhere, could have been responsible. As winter melted into spring, the investigation broadened, reaching beyond the immediate neighborhood into a network of informants, patrol officers, and community leaders. Rumors multiplied, each one darker than the last. There were whispers of a serial predator prowling the South Side, a man who targeted young women near transit stops, who struck quickly and vanished without trace. There were stories of underground trafficking rings, of girls abducted and transported out of state, their identities erased. There were even claims of ritualistic killings, secret societies, conspiracies that thrived in the imagination of a city accustomed to violence. Each theory demanded attention, yet none produced tangible evidence. Behind the scenes, a quieter struggle unfolded within the Morales family. Rosa's determination hardened into a relentless routine. She plastered missing person posters across bus shelters and lampposts, her fingers numb from cold and glue. She visited hospitals, shelters, and morgues, carrying Elena's photograph like a fragile relic, bracing herself for recognition in unfamiliar faces. Each rejection was both a relief and a fresh wound, proof that Elena was not among the dead, yet no closer to being found alive. Sleep became elusive. Meals went untouched. Grief seeped into every corner of the apartment, clinging to curtains, settling into cushions, haunting the empty bed where Elena once dreamed of a future. Friends tried to help, organizing fundraisers, distributing flyers, offering companionship in the long hours of waiting. But as months passed, their own lives demanded attention, and gradually, inevitably, they drifted back to routines that no longer included nightly searches and whispered prayers. The world, it seemed, was moving on, even as the Morales family remained trapped in a single, unending moment. By summer, the case had already acquired the faint patina of age, its urgency dulled by repetition and exhaustion. New detectives cycled through the file, each one bringing fresh energy, each one eventually confronting the same obstacles. Evidence was too thin. Witness memories had begun to fade. Physical traces were long gone. The city's resources were strained, diverted toward more recent crimes, more immediate threats. Elena's disappearance, once headline news, slipped into the background, resurfacing only on anniversaries or during occasional appeals for information. Yet even as official momentum slowed, subtle shifts were occurring beneath the surface. A patrol officer, reviewing old reports late one night, noticed a detail that had been overlooked, a call logged at 2:17 a.m., received by Elena's apartment phone, unanswered, its origin untraceable. At the time, it had been dismissed as a wrong number, a telemarketer, a late-night prank. Now, viewed through the lens of hindsight, it took on a more ominous tone. Who had called? And why at that exact moment? The officer flagged the entry, forwarding it to detectives, who added it to a growing list of unanswered questions. Another small anomaly surfaced in the diner's cash register logs. A transaction recorded at 12:04 a.m., minutes after Elena's shift ended, indicated a refund issued without explanation. The amount matched the price of a single coffee. It was a trivial detail, easily attributed to a clerical error, yet its timing was unsettling. Had the mysterious man received a refund? Had something occurred between him and Elena after closing? The receipt itself was gone, but the shadow it cast lingered, another faint outline in a story crowded with them. Detectives attempted to trace former employees, tracking down waitresses and cooks who had moved away, hoping that time might have loosened tongues or sharpened memories. Some offered new fragments: a customer who seemed overly curious about Elena's schedule, a stranger who lingered near the back exit, a car idling too long at the curb. None of these recollections were precise enough to build a case, yet together they suggested a pattern of observation, a sense that someone had been watching, waiting, choosing the right moment to act. As the years passed, technology advanced, and with it, the promise of resolution. DNA databases expanded. Fingerprint analysis improved. Old evidence, once considered useless, could now be re-examined with unprecedented precision. Elena's backpack was retrieved from storage, its fabric tested for microscopic traces, its zippers swabbed for skin cells. A partial profile emerged, degraded by time but still distinct, belonging to an unknown male. It was a breakthrough of sorts, a glimmer of hope that electrified the investigative team, yet the profile matched no one in existing databases. The city held its breath, waiting for the moment when that nameless genetic signature would finally find a match. In the meantime, life continued to unfold around the absence. Elena's younger cousins graduated from high school, married, had children who never knew the aunt whose photograph watched over family gatherings. Her mother grew older, her movements slower, her voice softer, yet her resolve never wavered. Every year, on the anniversary of Elena's disappearance, she stood at the corner near the diner, lighting a candle, whispering her daughter's name into the cold air. Passers-by paused, some out of curiosity, others in recognition, and for a few moments, the city remembered. The case lingered in a strange limbo, neither active nor abandoned, suspended in a perpetual state of anticipation. Detectives retired. New ones took their place, each inheriting the same thick folder, the same unanswered questions, the same fragile hope. Every so often, a tip would arrive, a prison inmate claiming knowledge, a drifter recounting a long-ago confession, an anonymous letter hinting at buried remains. Each lead was chased with cautious urgency, each one ultimately dissolving into disappointment. And yet, beneath the surface, something was shifting. The DNA profile, once isolated, began to circulate through expanding national databases, its digital echo traveling farther than any detective could. Unknown to the Morales family, unknown even to the officers who had first collected the sample, that fragment of genetic code was quietly waiting, poised on the edge of discovery, ready to intersect with a life that had, until then, remained beyond suspicion. In the streets of Chicago, the story of Elena Morales faded into urban legend, a cautionary tale whispered to daughters waiting for buses after dark, a reminder that danger could strike without warning. But in the quiet spaces between memory and hope, her absence continued to resonate, an unresolved chord that refused to resolve, a question suspended in time. And as the years accumulated, each one layering over the last, the case grew heavier, its mystery deepening, its silence more profound, until the very weight of that silence began to demand an answer. Somewhere, in the vast machinery of data and chance, a connection was forming, invisible, imperceptible, yet inevitable. The cold case, long dormant, was stirring, and though no one yet sensed it, the story of Elena Morales was approaching a moment that would shatter decades of uncertainty, a reckoning that would force the past into the light, and compel an entire city to confront the truth it had waited nearly 3 decades to face. By the early 2000s, the disappearance of Elena Morales had settled into the uneasy category reserved for cases that refused to die but no longer lived in the public eye, a cold case suspended between memory and neglect, its edges blurred by time, yet sharpened by persistence. The file itself had grown thick, swollen with reports, interviews, lab results, and faded photographs, a paper monument to nearly a decade of unanswered questions. Inside police headquarters, it sat among hundreds of others, each one representing a life interrupted, a family waiting, a truth that had slipped beyond reach. Yet, unlike many of its silent neighbors, this case was periodically pulled from its shelf, reopened, re-examined, its contents sifted through with renewed urgency whenever technology advanced or a new detective joined the unit with fresh determination. In 2004, a task force dedicated to reworking long-forgotten investigations was assembled, bringing together veteran officers hardened by years of disappointment and younger analysts trained in the emerging science of criminal profiling. Elena's case was among the first selected. The logic was simple. The original investigation had been hampered by limited forensic tools and overwhelmed resources. Now, with modern databases, digital mapping, and improved analytical methods, old evidence might yield new insights. The team began by reconstructing the final 48 hours of Elena's life, plotting her movements on detailed city maps, overlaying timelines, cross-referencing witness statements, searching for patterns that had once been invisible. They discovered subtle inconsistencies. A co-worker's recollection of a lingering customer conflicted with the diner's transaction logs. A neighbor's claim of hearing a scream did not align with police dispatch records. A supposed sighting near a train station occurred at a time when Elena's phone registered activity miles away. Each discrepancy hinted at the unreliability of memory, the way trauma and time distorted perception, yet also suggested that somewhere within these fractured narratives, a coherent story waited to be uncovered. One of the most tantalizing threads involved a series of similar disappearances in neighboring districts. Over a span of 3 years, 3 young women had vanished under comparable circumstances: late-night shifts, transit stops, minimal evidence, abandoned personal belongings. At the time, the cases had been investigated separately, scattered across jurisdictions, their connections unrecognized. Now, detectives overlaid timelines and routes, revealing chilling parallels. Each woman had last been seen within a few blocks of major bus lines. Each disappearance occurred between midnight and 3 a.m. Each victim fit a similar demographic profile: young, working class, responsible, cautious. The possibility of a serial offender emerged, a predator exploiting routine and trust, striking with precision and vanishing into the urban sprawl. Yet the evidence remained circumstantial. No physical links tied the cases together. No witness descriptions matched across incidents. DNA recovered from one scene failed to correspond with samples from another. The theory hovered, compelling yet unproven, a haunting specter that intensified the urgency of the search while offering no concrete direction. Still, the idea that Elena might not have been an isolated victim added a new layer of dread, transforming her disappearance from a singular tragedy into part of a broader, more terrifying pattern. As investigators pressed forward, they revisited the partial DNA profile extracted from Elena's backpack, submitting it to newly expanded national databases. The technology of familial DNA searching, still controversial and in its infancy, promised a different path. Rather than seeking a direct match, analysts could identify relatives of the unknown suspect, tracing genetic connections through extended family trees. The process was painstaking, fraught with ethical debate and technical limitations, yet it represented a radical shift in investigative strategy. For the first time, the search was no longer confined to known offenders. It could now reach into the general population, combing through genetic echoes to locate the source. Weeks turned into months as technicians processed samples, cross-referenced markers, and built complex genealogical charts. Each potential lead demanded meticulous verification, eliminating false positives, narrowing possibilities. Most paths ended abruptly, genetic coincidences that led nowhere. But slowly, inexorably, a faint signal began to emerge, a distant familial match connected to a man living on the outskirts of the city, someone who, on paper, bore no resemblance to a violent criminal. His name was Daniel Hargrove. In 1996, he had been 28, employed sporadically as a delivery driver, drifting between temporary jobs, his address shifting frequently across Chicago's southern districts. His criminal record was minimal, a handful of minor offenses, petty theft, disorderly conduct, nothing that would have drawn sustained attention. Yet the genetic data suggested a familial connection, distant but statistically significant, enough to warrant closer scrutiny. Detectives began the slow process of reconstructing his life, tracing his movements, interviewing former employers, neighbors, acquaintances, anyone who might recall his habits 2 decades earlier. What emerged was a portrait of a man who lived at the margins, socially isolated, prone to sudden relocations, and disturbingly fascinated by police activity. Former coworkers remembered his fixation on crime stories, his habit of lingering near crime scenes, his unsolicited commentary on investigative techniques. A neighbor recalled seeing him return home late at night, clothes rumpled, hands trembling, eyes darting as if scanning for unseen observers. None of these details proved guilt, yet together they painted a picture of unease, a sense that beneath his unremarkable exterior lay something volatile. Investigators dug deeper, uncovering that Hargrove had lived less than a mile from the diner where Elena worked, his apartment positioned along a bus route that intersected with her nightly commute. Phone records from the period, though incomplete, revealed calls placed from payphones near Elena's route, their timing aligning with her usual schedule. Surveillance footage, long considered too degraded to be useful, was reprocessed using modern enhancement techniques, revealing a shadowed figure whose height and build matched Hargrove's. The image remained indistinct, yet the convergence of circumstantial evidence was unsettling. Despite mounting suspicion, the case remained precarious. There was no body, no direct confession, no incontrovertible proof tying Hargrove to Elena's disappearance. Legal standards demanded more than inference. Detectives sought additional DNA samples, hoping to obtain a definitive match, yet without probable cause, their options were limited. Covert surveillance began, tracking Hargrove's daily routines, monitoring his interactions, waiting for a mistake, a slip, a fragment of evidence that might bridge the gap between suspicion and certainty. Years passed. Hargrove aged, his hair thinning, his posture stooping, his life settling into quiet obscurity. He married briefly, divorced, drifted through low-wage jobs, eventually retreating into near isolation. To neighbors, he was a ghostly presence, rarely seen, seldom spoken to. To investigators, he became a focal point, a constant background presence in a case that refused to fade. Every new development in forensic science prompted another attempt to pierce the veil surrounding him, another careful approach, another frustrating retreat. In 2018, a breakthrough arrived from an unexpected quarter. A distant relative of Hargrove uploaded their genetic profile to a public genealogy database, seeking information about ancestral roots. The match reverberated through law enforcement systems, strengthening the familial link to the DNA found on Elena's backpack. This time, the statistical probability was overwhelming. Armed with this data, detectives secured a court order to collect a discarded item from Hargrove, retrieving a coffee cup from a diner he frequented. The sample, tested in silence, produced a match that shattered decades of uncertainty. The unknown male DNA recovered in 1996 belonged to Daniel Hargrove. The revelation electrified the task force. After 22 years, the case had a name, a face, a living suspect. Yet even now, caution prevailed. A DNA match alone could not explain the absence of a body, the lack of a crime scene, the missing narrative of what had transpired after Elena vanished. Detectives prepared meticulously, assembling a timeline, compiling witness statements, corroborating every fragment of evidence. They needed not only to arrest Hargrove, but to confront him with an unassailable case, one that could withstand the scrutiny of courtrooms and the weight of history. On a gray morning in October, unmarked vehicles converged on Hargrove's modest bungalow. Officers approached with measured steps, weapons holstered, voices steady. He answered the door in slippers and a faded sweatshirt, his expression shifting from confusion to apprehension as they identified themselves. He did not resist. In the back of the squad car, as rain streaked the windows, he stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, hands folded tightly in his lap, the posture of a man who had long rehearsed this moment. Inside the interrogation room, under the unblinking glare of fluorescent lights, detectives laid out the evidence, piece by piece, reconstructing a story he had buried beneath decades of routine. They spoke of DNA, of surveillance footage, of witness accounts, of the backpack abandoned in a dumpster. They described Elena's final steps, her unfulfilled dreams, her mother's endless waiting. For hours, Hargrove remained silent, eyes fixed on the table, his breathing shallow, his shoulders rigid. Then, as the weight of proof closed in, something within him shifted, and the first cracks appeared in the carefully maintained facade. What followed would redefine the case, forcing investigators, the Morales family, and an entire city to confront a truth more harrowing than any theory, a revelation that would ripple backward through time, reshaping the narrative of 1996 and casting every unanswered question in a new, devastating light. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights and the distant echo of footsteps in the corridor, a sterile space where time seemed to stretch, compress, and fracture all at once, and in that suspended moment, Daniel Hargrove sat across from two detectives who had waited more than 2 decades for this encounter, his hands trembling just enough to betray the storm churning beneath his controlled exterior, his eyes fixed on the scuffed surface of the metal table as though it might offer refuge from the gravity of what was about to unfold. The air was thick, charged, carrying the weight of years, of unanswered prayers, of a family's unrelenting grief, and as the door closed behind them, sealing off the world beyond, the past began to leak into the present, drop by painstaking drop. At first, Hargrove said nothing. He listened as detectives methodically reconstructed the night of February 13th, 1996, their voices steady, relentless, stripping away the layers of time and denial. They spoke of the diner's closing shift, of the bus that never arrived, of the alley where Elena's backpack would later be found. They described the surveillance footage, the shadowed figure, the partial DNA profile that had lingered in forensic limbo for years, waiting for technology to catch up. With each detail, his jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck flexing as if bracing for impact. Still, he remained silent, retreating inward, clinging to a fragile composure. Hours passed. Coffee grew cold. The lights never dimmed. Detectives pressed gently, then firmly, probing for inconsistencies, challenging his alibi, confronting him with the genetic evidence that tied him inexorably to the scene. When they finally slid the lab report across the table, its stark conclusions printed in black ink, Hargrove's eyes flicked toward it, lingering for a fraction of a second before darting away. The room exhaled. The moment had arrived. He spoke then, his voice barely above a whisper, strained, uneven, as though forcing sound through a throat long accustomed to silence. He denied intention. He denied planning. He denied everything except proximity, insisting that chance had drawn him near Elena that night, that their encounter had been fleeting, meaningless, a collision of two lives destined to diverge. Yet as the interrogation deepened, the cracks widened. His narrative shifted, contorted, shedding fragments of truth in a desperate attempt to maintain control. And in those fragments, detectives glimpsed the outline of a far darker story. According to Hargrove, he had first noticed Elena weeks before her disappearance, watching her from across the street as she locked up the diner, memorizing her schedule, her habits, the quiet rhythm of her nights. He spoke of loneliness, of resentment, of a longing for connection twisted into obsession, his words spilling out in disjointed bursts that revealed a mind both calculating and profoundly disordered. On the night she vanished, he claimed, he followed her as she waited for the bus, his heart pounding, his thoughts spiraling, until a moment of impulse eclipsed restraint. What happened next, he said, was an accident, a confrontation that escalated beyond his control, a struggle that ended in irreversible silence. Yet when pressed for specifics, his account grew murky, evasive. He described a secluded spot beneath an overpass, a brief altercation, a blow that left her unconscious, but when detectives demanded to know where her body lay, he faltered, his story unraveling into contradictions and half-formed admissions. He spoke of panic, of driving aimlessly, of the city's vastness swallowing his fear, but offered no concrete location, no verifiable detail. It was as though he stood at the edge of confession, peering into its depths, yet refused to take the final step. For investigators, the frustration was acute. They had waited decades for this moment, only to find themselves confronting a man skilled in evasion, one who understood the boundaries of the law and maneuvered within them with chilling precision. Without a body, without a crime scene, the case remained perilously incomplete. Hargrove's partial admissions hinted at guilt, yet stopped short of the unequivocal truth needed to secure a conviction. Each answer spawned new questions. Each revelation opened fresh avenues of uncertainty, and the sense of impending resolution flickered, fragile, uncertain. Outside the interrogation room, the news broke. Chicago awoke to headlines that reverberated across the city. A 1996 cold case, dormant for 29 years, had finally yielded a suspect. Television crews crowded police headquarters. Reporters jostled for statements. Social media erupted, resurrecting Elena's face, her story, her long-silenced voice. For the Morales family, the moment was both surreal and devastating. Rosa received the call in the early hours of the morning, her heart pounding as she listened, scarcely daring to breathe. A suspect. An arrest. After all these years, the truth might finally emerge. Yet hope arrived tangled with fear. What if he refused to talk? What if Elena's fate remained a mystery even now? Rosa wept, her tears blurring the edges of a photograph she had carried in her wallet for nearly 3 decades. She had imagined this moment countless times, rehearsed the words she would speak, the questions she would ask, yet when it arrived, she found herself overwhelmed, suspended between anticipation and dread. As detectives continued their interrogation, new details surfaced, fragments of a night long buried. Hargrove admitted to disposing of Elena's belongings, to driving through unfamiliar neighborhoods, to wandering for hours before returning home at dawn, his clothes stained, his hands shaking. He spoke of nightmares, of insomnia, of a life haunted by a single irreversible act. But when pressed for the location of her remains, he claimed not to remember, insisting that panic had erased the specifics, that the city's endless labyrinth had consumed the final clues. This assertion ignited a furious response. Investigators confronted him with maps, timelines, GPS reconstructions of his likely route based on cell tower data, attempting to jog a memory he claimed no longer possessed. They described landmarks, bridges, industrial zones, riverbanks, anywhere a body might have been concealed. Each suggestion was met with hesitation, vague acknowledgement, denial. The truth, it seemed, lay buried not only in the ground but within a psyche armored against remorse. Despite the uncertainty, prosecutors moved forward, charging Hargrove with kidnapping and murder, assembling a case built upon DNA evidence, circumstantial proof, and his own contradictory statements. It was a precarious gamble, one that risked collapse under the scrutiny of defense attorneys poised to exploit every gap, every inconsistency. Yet the alternative, allowing the case to fade once more into silence, was unthinkable. As the legal process unfolded, search teams combed the locations Hargrove had frequented in 1996, guided by partial maps and faint recollections. They excavated vacant lots, dredged sections of river, probed beneath overpasses, and sifted through landfills long since sealed. Each search carried the promise of closure, the possibility of finally returning Elena to her family, yet each ended in disappointment, the earth yielding nothing but fragments of unrelated lives, forgotten debris, the detritus of time. The absence of a body transformed the trial into a battleground of narratives. Prosecutors painted Hargrove as a predator, methodical, calculating, driven by obsession. Defense attorneys countered with ambiguity, questioning the reliability of decades-old evidence, the integrity of forensic techniques, the motives of witnesses whose memories had faded. They argued coincidence, contamination, misinterpretation, constructing a fog of doubt dense enough to obscure even the most damning facts. In court, Elena's photograph loomed large, projected onto screens, its youthful optimism a stark contrast to the grim proceedings. Jurors studied her face, her smile, her eyes, searching for some clue, some whisper of the life that had been stolen. Rosa sat in the front row, her posture rigid, her gaze unwavering, absorbing every word, every gesture, as though imprinting them upon her memory. For her, the trial was not an abstract exercise in justice, but a final reckoning, the culmination of decades spent suspended between hope and despair. Hargrove, seated at the defense table, avoided her eyes. When he did glance in her direction, his expression was unreadable, a mask of detachment that offered neither remorse nor defiance. To the public, he became a symbol of the city's darkest fears, proof that evil could hide in plain sight, aging quietly among neighbors who never suspected. To investigators, he was the embodiment of unfinished business, a man who had carried a secret for nearly 30 years, now forced into the unforgiving glare of truth. As testimony unfolded, the courtroom became a crucible where past and present collided, where science and memory clashed, where the relentless passage of time was laid bare. Each witness, each exhibit, each painstaking reconstruction of events chipped away at the wall of uncertainty, yet the core question remained stubbornly intact. Where was Elena Morales? The trial moved forward, relentless, unforgiving, dragging every shadow into the light. Yet even as the machinery of justice churned, the city held its breath, aware that the outcome would resonate far beyond a single verdict. For in this case, the pursuit of truth was not merely about guilt or innocence, but about confronting the limits of certainty, the fragility of memory, and the haunting possibility that some answers, once lost, might never be fully reclaimed. The courtroom felt smaller with each passing day, its walls pressing inward as though straining to contain the gravity of what unfolded inside, and with every witness called to the stand, the story of Elena Morales grew heavier, more intricate, more devastating, a mosaic assembled from fragments of memory, science, and longing. Jurors leaned forward, notebooks filling with hurried scrawls, eyes darting between exhibits and testimony, while the audience sat in near silence, broken only by the faint rustle of paper and the occasional muffled sob. Outside, cameras waited, Reporters rehearsed sound bites, and the city held its collective breath, but inside, time slowed to the relentless pace of justice. The prosecution opened its case by reconstructing the final hours of Elena's life, threading together surveillance footage, witness statements, and forensic evidence into a narrative designed to pierce doubt. They spoke of routine and vulnerability, of how predictability could become a weapon in the wrong hands, and of a man who exploited that vulnerability with chilling precision. Maps were projected onto large screens, tracing the route from the diner to the bus stop, from the bus stop to the secluded underpass, each step illuminated with clinical clarity. Jurors followed the lines, their eyes moving across the familiar grid of Chicago streets, now transformed into a silent theater of tragedy. Expert witnesses took the stand, their voices measured, their language precise. A forensic analyst described the extraction of DNA from Elena's backpack, detailing the painstaking process by which microscopic skin cells had been amplified and preserved, surviving decades in storage to deliver their long-awaited revelation. Charts illustrated genetic markers, probability ratios, and the statistical certainty that bound the sample to Daniel Hargrove. Defense attorneys rose to challenge the methodology, probing for contamination, degradation, or misinterpretation, but each attempt was met with calm rebuttal, the science holding firm beneath scrutiny. A digital imaging specialist followed, presenting enhanced versions of the 1996 surveillance footage. The grainy silhouettes once dismissed as useless now resolved into clearer shapes, their movements mapped, their dimensions measured. The figure lingering near the diner matched Hargrove's height, his gait, his posture. The comparison was not perfect, but it was persuasive, another thread woven into a tightening web. Jurors studied the side-by-side images, their expressions shifting as recognition dawned, the abstract becoming tangible, the past encroaching upon the present. Then came the witnesses, each carrying a piece of the story, each voice a bridge across time. A former waitress described the unease she had felt that night, the sense of being watched, the lingering presence of a customer who refused to leave. Her memory, sharpened by years of reflection, trembled as she recounted the moment Elena stepped into the cold, her figure shrinking beneath the glow of streetlights. A bus driver testified to the emptiness of his late-night route, to the isolation of stops where passengers waited alone, vulnerable in the vast dark. A neighbor spoke of seeing a car idling too long near the curb, its engine humming like a restrained breath. The defense countered with a barrage of doubt. They emphasized the fallibility of memory, the unreliability of eyewitness accounts stretched across decades, the seductive danger of hindsight. They called their own experts, who questioned the interpretation of genetic data, who warned of confirmation bias, who reminded jurors that circumstantial evidence, no matter how compelling, remained a fragile foundation upon which to build a conviction. Their strategy was clear: erode certainty, fracture narrative, leave behind a residue of reasonable doubt. At the center of it all sat Rosa Morales, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes rarely leaving the witness stand. Each testimony reopened old wounds, forcing her to relive the night her daughter vanished, the years of searching, the endless waiting. Yet within her grief burned a fierce resolve. She had endured too much to surrender now. Every detail, every revelation, no matter how painful, brought her closer to an answer, and that proximity sustained her, even as it threatened to break her. Midway through the trial, prosecutors introduced the most volatile element of their case: Hargrove's own statements. Recorded interrogations echoed through the courtroom, his voice distorted by static, recounting fragments of the night, offering partial admissions that hovered just short of confession. Jurors listened intently as he described following Elena, his tone oscillating between detachment and agitation, his narrative riddled with gaps and contradictions. The prosecution seized upon these inconsistencies, presenting them as evidence of deception, of a man struggling to contain a truth too damning to fully acknowledge. Defense attorneys attacked the recordings, arguing coercion, fatigue, psychological pressure. They portrayed Hargrove as a vulnerable individual, worn down by hours of questioning, his words shaped by suggestion and fear rather than memory. They insisted that without a body, without a definitive crime scene, the state's case rested on inference, not fact. The courtroom became a battleground of interpretation, each side vying to define reality itself. Outside the courthouse, public opinion swelled and shifted like a tide. Talk radio buzzed with speculation. Online forums dissected every development, every facial expression, every legal maneuver. Some demanded swift justice, convinced of Hargrove's guilt. Others urged caution, haunted by the specter of wrongful convictions, by stories of innocent lives destroyed by circumstantial evidence. The case transcended its origins, becoming a lens through which the city examined its own anxieties, its faith in institutions, its hunger for closure. As the trial progressed, search efforts intensified. Investigators, spurred by subtle hints buried within Hargrove's statements, returned to areas long dismissed, deploying ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and excavation teams. They scoured riverbanks, industrial corridors, forgotten lots where concrete had cracked and weeds had claimed dominion. Each dig carried the weight of expectation, the possibility of ending decades of uncertainty. Yet time and again, the earth yielded nothing, its silence unbroken, its secrets intact. The absence of Elena's remains cast a long shadow over the proceedings. Without physical proof of death, the prosecution faced an uphill battle, tasked with convincing jurors that disappearance equated to murder, that absence itself was evidence. They pointed to patterns, to statistics, to the grim reality that few vanished under such circumstances were ever found alive. They invoked common sense, urging jurors to imagine the implausibility of Elena choosing to abandon her family, her dreams, her life. The argument resonated, yet doubt lingered, stubborn, unyielding. In the final weeks of testimony, the emotional toll became palpable. Witnesses faltered. Attorneys' voices grew hoarse. Jurors shifted restlessly in their seats, burdened by the enormity of their responsibility. Rosa's health wavered, her body straining under the weight of sustained anguish. Still, she attended every session, her presence a silent plea, a testament to endurance, a reminder that this trial was not an abstract contest, but a reckoning long overdue. Closing arguments arrived like a gathering storm. The prosecution spoke of duty, of perseverance, of a society's obligation to its most vulnerable. They framed the case as a triumph of persistence over time, of science over silence, of hope over despair. They asked jurors to look beyond the absence of a body, to see the totality of evidence, the convergence of circumstance and proof, and to deliver a verdict that honored Elena's life. The defense responded with caution, with warnings against emotional reasoning, against the seductive simplicity of narrative. They reminded jurors that the standard was not probability, but certainty beyond reasonable doubt, that the consequences of error were irrevocable. They painted Hargrove as a convenient target, ensnared by technological coincidence and investigative zeal, and implored the jury to uphold the presumption of innocence, even in the face of tragedy. As the jury retired to deliberate, the courtroom exhaled, tension lingering like static in the air. Days stretched on, each hour a test of patience and resolve. Rosa waited in a nearby room, clutching a worn photograph, her thoughts spiraling between hope and fear. Detectives paced hallways, replaying testimony, second-guessing strategy. Reporters speculated, analysts predicted outcomes, yet no one could penetrate the closed doors where 12 individuals wrestled with a decision that would reverberate across generations. When the call finally came, summoning all parties back to the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted, a palpable surge of anticipation rippling through the crowd. Jurors filed in, faces solemn, eyes averted. Rosa rose unsteadily, bracing herself against the bench. The judge called for silence. The clerk stood, verdict form in hand, and in that suspended moment, the years collapsed into a single breath, the weight of nearly 3 decades converging upon a few decisive words. Whatever the outcome, one truth had already emerged, undeniable and irreversible. The past could be unearthed, its secrets dragged into the light, but the cost of that revelation was profound. measured not only in justice served or denied, but in lives irrevocably altered, in wounds reopened, in a city forced to confront the echoes of its own forgotten tragedies. The courtroom seemed to contract around the jury as they returned, 12 figures carrying the weight of 29 years in their hands, their faces carved with exhaustion, their movements deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if any sudden gesture might fracture the fragile gravity of the moment. The murmur of the crowd dissolved into a hush so complete it felt artificial, a vacuum where even breathing sounded intrusive. Rosa Morales stood, gripping the edge of the bench, her knuckles pale, her heart pounding against her ribs with such force it blurred her vision. Somewhere in the back, a camera shutter clicked, the sound sharp as a gunshot, then vanished into the stillness. The clerk cleared her throat. The verdict was read.
Guilty.
For a fraction of a second, the word hung in the air, suspended, weightless, incomprehensible. Then reality surged forward. Rosa's knees buckled, her body folding inward as a cry tore from her chest, a sound that carried 29 years of unanswered prayers, of sleepless nights, of relentless waiting. Family members rushed to steady her, their own tears spilling freely, while across the aisle, Hargrove remained motionless, his face drained of color, his gaze fixed on some invisible point beyond the walls of the room. The city exhaled. The cold case, once a ghost, now had a verdict, a legal conclusion etched into the public record. Yet justice, in its stark finality, offered no map to Elena's remains, no gentle closure to the long years of uncertainty. The conviction answered the question of who, but not where, and for Rosa, that unanswered question gnawed more fiercely than ever. The sentence that followed, life imprisonment without parole, was received with solemn nods, a punishment commensurate with the crime, yet hollow in its inability to restore what had been taken. As deputies led Hargrove away, shackles clinking softly against the polished floor, the distance between justice and peace became painfully clear. In the weeks that followed, investigators returned once more to the search, driven by renewed determination and the faint hope that the weight of conviction might loosen Hargrove's grip on the truth. They appealed to him through attorneys, clergy, psychologists, anyone who might penetrate the defensive barriers he had constructed. They spoke of dignity, of mercy, of the simple human act of allowing a family to bury their dead. For a time, their efforts were met with silence, the prison walls absorbing each plea, each carefully worded request. Then, unexpectedly, a message arrived. Hargrove had agreed to talk. The meeting took place inside a stark interview room at the correctional facility, its bare concrete walls echoing with institutional coldness. He appeared older now, diminished, the confidence that had once shielded him stripped away by the relentless machinery of incarceration. His hands trembled as he clasped them together, eyes darting between the detectives and the floor. Something within him had shifted, eroded by isolation, by the irreversible knowledge that his life outside those walls was over. He began haltingly, describing the night once more, this time with greater specificity, as though the verdict had freed him from the need to maintain illusions. He spoke of the bus stop, of the brief exchange, of her hesitation, of the moment when fear replaced routine. He described driving south, away from familiar streets, into industrial corridors where factories loomed like dormant beasts, their skeletal frames casting jagged shadows beneath sodium lamps. He spoke of an abandoned lot near the Calumet River, a place where rusted fences sagged and debris lay scattered, where the earth itself seemed tired, resigned to secrecy. Detectives listened, recording every word, their expressions betraying nothing. When he finished, they asked for details, coordinates, landmarks, distances, pinning his recollection to the map with meticulous care. He provided them, hesitantly, correcting himself, second-guessing, struggling against the distortions of time. Yet beneath the uncertainty, a consistent thread emerged, a narrow corridor of possibility. Search teams mobilized at dawn. The site lay on the outskirts of the city, a forgotten expanse of cracked concrete, overgrown weeds, and rusted machinery, its proximity to the river lending it a perpetual dampness that seeped into clothing and bone. Heavy machinery rumbled to life as crews cordoned off the area, their movements deliberate, methodical, a choreography honed by years of recovery operations. Cadaver dogs circled, noses low, tails rigid, their handlers scanning for any change in behavior. Ground-penetrating radar traced invisible grids across the earth, probing for anomalies, for disruptions in the natural layering of soil. For hours, the search yielded nothing. Shovels struck stone. Machines scraped through rubble. Sweat mingled with rain as the sky darkened, clouds gathering in a silent mirror of the tension below. Rosa waited at the perimeter, sheltered beneath a small canopy, her breath shallow, her hands clenched around a rosary worn smooth by decades of repetition. Each scrape of metal against earth sent a jolt through her, a collision of hope and terror. Late in the afternoon, a handler raised his hand. The dog had alerted. The signal was subtle, a change in posture, a focused stillness, but unmistakable to those who had spent years interpreting its meaning. The machinery halted. The air seemed to thicken. Investigators knelt, marking the spot, then began to dig by hand, each movement careful, reverent. Inches passed, then feet. The soil grew darker, denser, carrying a faint, unmistakable odor that tightened throats and stilled conversation. A fragment of fabric emerged first, threadbare, its color bleached by time and moisture. Then a curve of bone. Silence descended, heavy, absolute. The recovery team worked with painstaking delicacy, brushing away earth, documenting each discovery, reconstructing a story written in decay. Slowly, heartbreakingly, the outline of a human form took shape, its fragile remains curled as if in sleep. Elena had been found. The announcement traveled through the crowd in a wave of whispered disbelief, then erupted into sobs, prayers, stunned exhalations. Rosa collapsed to her knees, her grief transforming, for the first time, into something edged with relief. After 29 years, she could finally bring her daughter home. The cost of that revelation was unbearable, yet the alternative, never knowing, had proven even more cruel. Forensic teams confirmed the identity through dental records and DNA comparison, their conclusions swift, definitive. The bones bore evidence of trauma consistent with Hargrove's belated confession, yet time had softened the details, erasing much of the violence, leaving behind only the quiet testimony of endurance. Elena's remains were placed into a simple wooden coffin, draped with white cloth and transported under escort, a solemn procession through streets that had once swallowed her without a sound. The funeral drew hundreds. Family, friends, neighbors, detectives, strangers who had followed the case from afar, all gathered within the hushed sanctuary of a small church on the south side, its stained-glass windows casting muted color across rows of bowed heads. Photographs of Elena lined the altar, chronicling a life interrupted. Childhood birthdays, school recitals, graduation day, the hopeful smile of a young woman standing on the brink of possibility. As hymns filled the space, their notes trembling with emotion, the community confronted a collective grief long deferred. Rosa spoke briefly, her voice fragile yet resolute. She thanked those who had refused to forget, who had carried Elena's story through decades of indifference and doubt. She spoke of love, of memory, of the enduring bond between mother and daughter that even death could not sever. And then, with a steadiness born of unimaginable endurance, she said goodbye. In the aftermath, the city returned, cautiously, to routine. Headlines faded. Cameras moved on. Yet the impact of the case lingered, etched into institutional memory and personal conscience alike. Police departments revisited their cold case protocols, investing in forensic technology, expanding genealogical databases, forging new collaborations. Advocates cited Elena's story as proof that persistence could pierce even the thickest veil of time, that no case was ever truly beyond hope. For detectives who had devoted years to the investigation, the resolution brought a complex mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. They had achieved what once seemed impossible, yet the victory was tempered by the knowledge that nothing could restore what had been lost. In quiet moments, they replayed the case, wondering whether a faster breakthrough, an overlooked clue, a different decision might have altered the outcome. Such questions, they knew, had no answers, yet they haunted the edges of accomplishment. As for Hargrove, he retreated into the anonymity of prison life, his confession sealing his fate, his name forever linked to a crime that would outlive him. In rare letters to investigators, he offered fragmented reflections, apologies stripped of expectation, acknowledgments devoid of redemption. Whether remorse or resignation guided his words remained uncertain. The damage he had wrought could not be undone, only acknowledged. For Rosa, life after resolution unfolded in a strange new silence. The rituals of searching, of waiting, of hoping against reason had defined her existence for so long that their absence felt disorienting. Yet within that void, a fragile peace began to take root. She visited Elena's grave often, speaking aloud the thoughts she had once whispered into the night, recounting the small details of daily life, the ordinary moments she wished she could share. In those conversations, she found solace, a connection that transcended the boundaries of loss. And though the story had reached its legal conclusion, its emotional reverberations continued to ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the Morales family. It became a testament to endurance, a reminder of vulnerability, a cautionary tale etched into the collective consciousness of a city that had learned, once again, that beneath the clamor of its streets, in the spaces between light and shadow, the past waited patiently, ready to emerge when least expected. The cold case had been solved, but its echo, long and haunting, would linger. A reminder that some truths demand decades to surface, and that when they finally do, they arrive bearing both the promise of closure and the irrevocable weight of what can never be reclaimed. In the months that followed Elena's burial, Chicago settled into an uneasy quiet, the kind that arrives not with peace, but with exhaustion, as though the city itself needed time to recover from the weight of a story carried for nearly 3 decades. The headlines had faded, the television vans had departed, and the courthouse steps returned to their usual anonymity, yet beneath that surface calm, something profound had shifted. The resolution of the cold case did not close a chapter so much as it tore open an entire archive of buried grief, forcing a reckoning that rippled far beyond one family, one street, one forgotten night. Within law enforcement, Elena's case became a benchmark, a cautionary tale, and a beacon of possibility intertwined. Detectives who had spent years sifting through its fragments gathered in briefing rooms, dissecting every turn of the investigation, every decision, every moment of hesitation and persistence. They spoke of missed opportunities, of evidence dismissed too quickly, of technological limitations that had once seemed insurmountable. They also spoke of resilience, of how patience, combined with scientific progress, had transformed a long-dormant file into a living, breathing pursuit of justice. In training sessions, Elena's story was retold, not as a triumph, but as a reminder. No case is ever truly over, and no absence should be accepted as permanent. Cold case units across the city experienced a quiet resurgence. Funding was redirected. Specialized teams were expanded. Partnerships with genealogical laboratories were formalized, their databases now recognized as indispensable tools rather than controversial novelties. Families who had long abandoned hope began to reach out once more, submitting DNA samples, dusting off faded photographs, reopening wounds in the fragile belief that perhaps, just perhaps, their stories might also find resolution. For every case reopened, another family braced itself for the possibility of truth, knowing that answers, once delivered, rarely arrive gently. Yet for Rosa Morales, the aftermath unfolded on a far more intimate scale. The rhythms of her life, once dominated by searching and waiting, had vanished overnight, leaving behind a hollow silence that pressed against her chest in the early hours before dawn. For years, Her days had revolved around police updates, community meetings, prayer vigils, and solitary walks through neighborhoods haunted by memory. Now, there were no calls to anticipate, no flyers to distribute, no searches to organize. The absence of those rituals felt disorienting, as though the world had abruptly withdrawn a gravity she had relied upon to stay upright. She found herself wandering the apartment, pausing in Elena's room, touching the edges of old textbooks, tracing the outlines of childhood drawings still taped to the wall. The space had become a museum of suspended time, a shrine to a daughter perpetually 22. Friends urged her to pack away the belongings, to create space for healing, but she resisted, clinging to the physical evidence of a life that had once filled those rooms with laughter and ambition. Each object carried a story, and letting go felt like surrendering a piece of Elena all over again. Gradually, however, Rosa began to step beyond the boundaries of grief, guided not by resolution, but by purpose. Letters arrived daily from strangers across the country, some offering condolences, others sharing their own stories of loss, of waiting, of unresolved disappearance. Many asked how she had endured, how she had preserved hope through decades of silence. She responded to each one, her handwriting careful, her words measured, emphasizing persistence, community, and the necessity of refusing erasure. In those exchanges, she discovered a new role, not merely as a grieving mother, but as a witness, a voice for countless others navigating similar voids. She began speaking at community forums, at police academies, at conferences dedicated to missing persons advocacy. Standing before rooms filled with officers, social workers, and families, she recounted Elena's story not as a tragedy alone, but as a testament to endurance. She spoke of the long years when every unanswered phone call felt like a small death, of the nights when hope seemed irrational, even cruel, yet remained the only force strong enough to carry her forward. Her voice, once trembling, grew steadier with each retelling, imbued with a quiet authority forged in suffering. Meanwhile, the legal aftermath of Hargrove's conviction unfolded in slow, procedural increments. Appeals were filed, motions submitted, arguments rehearsed in sterile courtrooms far removed from the raw emotion of the original trial. Defense attorneys challenged the admissibility of genealogical DNA evidence, raising constitutional questions that reverberated across legal communities nationwide. Civil liberties organizations weighed in, cautioning against unchecked surveillance and the erosion of genetic privacy. Prosecutors countered with the imperative of justice, arguing that the careful, court-sanctioned use of emerging technology had delivered answers where traditional methods had failed. The debates were complex, nuanced, and unresolved, reflecting a society grappling with the implications of unprecedented scientific power. Elena's case became a focal point in this discourse, cited in legal briefs, academic journals, and policy discussions as both a triumph and a warning. It underscored the delicate balance between innovation and restraint, between the pursuit of truth and the preservation of individual rights. For some, it represented the future of criminal investigation. For others, it raised troubling questions about consent, surveillance, and the boundaries of state authority. Within prison walls, Hargrove faded into obscurity, his name slowly retreating from headlines, his presence absorbed into the anonymous machinery of incarceration. Yet the echoes of his actions persisted, surfacing in occasional letters, in brief mentions during appeals hearings, in the whispered anxieties of those who wondered how such violence could have gone undetected for so long. He became less a man than a symbol, a reminder that monstrosity often hides behind ordinariness, that evil rarely announces itself with spectacle, but instead insinuates quietly into routine. For the detectives who had shepherded the case through its final stages, the resolution brought neither triumph nor relief, but a complicated stillness. They returned to their desks, to other files, other names, other waiting families, carrying with them the indelible imprint of Elena's story. In late-night moments, they revisited the timeline, the decisions made, the leads dismissed, haunted by the possibility that a faster resolution might have spared years of anguish. Yet they also recognized the limits of their tools, the constraints of their era, the inevitability of uncertainty in a city overwhelmed by violence. One detective, nearing retirement, began volunteering with a nonprofit dedicated to cold case advocacy, his experience guiding families through the labyrinth of bureaucracy and delay. Another pursued advanced training in forensic genealogy, determined to ensure that future investigations would not languish for decades. Their personal trajectories, shaped by a single case, reflected a broader transformation within the profession, a renewed commitment to perseverance, humility, and innovation. In the neighborhoods surrounding the diner where Elena had last been seen, subtle changes unfolded. A small memorial plaque was installed near the bus stop, bearing her name, her dates, and a simple inscription, "She is remembered." Residents paused before it, leaving flowers, notes, and photographs, transforming an anonymous stretch of sidewalk into a site of collective memory. Parents pointed it out to their children, recounting the story in hushed tones, framing it as both warning and tribute. The plaque became a quiet anchor, a reminder that beneath the ordinary pulse of the city lay histories of loss and resilience intertwined. Each year, on the anniversary of Elena's disappearance, a candlelight vigil gathered once more, smaller than before, yet no less poignant. The crowd stood in silence, flames trembling in the night air, their reflections flickering in storefront windows. Names of other missing persons were read aloud, a solemn roll call that extended far beyond a single story. In those moments, the boundaries between past and present dissolved, replaced by a shared recognition of fragility, of the tenuous line separating routine from catastrophe. The vigil ended, as always, with a final prayer, a collective breath, a gradual dispersal into the waiting streets. Yet the atmosphere lingered, a gentle pressure upon the chest, an awareness that resolution did not erase pain, but transformed it into something enduring, something capable of guiding action, of shaping memory, of forging community. For Rosa, the journey continued, no longer defined by searching, but by remembrance. She planted a small garden beside Elena's grave, tending to it through changing seasons, her hands sinking into soil, her thoughts drifting between sorrow and gratitude. She spoke to her daughter as she worked, recounting the trivial details of daily life, the mundane victories and disappointments that once filled their conversations. In those moments, the boundary between absence and presence blurred, replaced by a fragile sense of continuity. And though the cold case had been solved, its resonance persisted, echoing through courtrooms, police stations, family homes, and quiet corners of the city where memory refused to fade. It served as a testament to endurance, a caution against complacency, and a reminder that every unanswered question carries a human cost. For in the end, the story of Elena Morales was not solely about a crime committed or a perpetrator caught, but about the enduring power of hope, the relentless pursuit of truth, and the profound, irrevocable impact of a single life upon an entire community. The city moved forward, as cities always do, yet beneath the relentless rhythm of traffic and commerce, the echo remained, a soft, persistent reminder that the past is never truly past, that it waits, patient and unyielding, for the moment when it will finally be heard. Time resumed its steady march, yet in the wake of the verdict and the burial, it moved differently, less like a river and more like a slow, relentless tide, reshaping the emotional landscape of everyone it touched. The story of Elena Morales, once a headline, then a whisper, now settled into the deeper strata of collective memory, a cautionary echo embedded in the architecture of the city itself. In police academies, her case became required study. In community centers, it became a parable of vigilance. In countless homes, it became a quiet warning spoken to daughters waiting for late buses, a reminder that ordinary nights could fracture without warning. The ripple effects of the case reached far beyond Chicago. Law enforcement agencies across the country began re-examining dormant files, dusting off evidence sealed in brown boxes and rusted lockers, submitting decades-old samples to modern laboratories. Genealogical DNA searches, once tentative and controversial, gained new momentum, their potential no longer theoretical but proven, their promise undeniable. Families long resigned to uncertainty found themselves summoned back into hope, asked to provide saliva samples, photographs, fragments of memory that might reignite stalled investigations. For many, the request reopened wounds they had spent years learning to endure, yet the possibility of answers proved irresistible. Across kitchen tables and living room couches, difficult conversations unfolded. Parents weighed the cost of reopening old grief against the chance of resolution. Siblings debated whether they were ready to confront truths that might shatter carefully constructed narratives. Each decision carried emotional risk, yet Elena's story hovered over these moments like a guiding star, a testament that perseverance, though agonizing, could eventually yield clarity. Slowly, hesitantly, families stepped forward, their DNA joining a growing archive of hope. Within legal circles, the case continued to reverberate. Courts grappled with the implications of genetic genealogy, its unprecedented reach into private family histories. Scholars argued over the boundaries of consent, the ethics of implicating individuals through relatives who had volunteered information for entirely different purposes. Legislative committees convened, drafting guidelines intended to balance innovation with civil liberties, justice with restraint. Elena's name appeared in legal briefs and academic journals, her life entwined with debates that would shape the future of criminal investigation. Yet beyond policy and protocol, the emotional aftermath unfolded in quieter spaces, in the small, unguarded moments when grief and relief collided. For Rosa, the days following the funeral brought a peculiar emptiness, a silence so profound it bordered on vertigo. For nearly 3 decades, her life had been organized around a single absence, every thought and action orbiting the question of where Elena might be. Now that question had been answered, brutally and definitively, leaving behind a void no less consuming. In the stillness of early mornings, she found herself reaching for the phone, half expecting a call from detectives, a new lead, some urgent development. The realization that there would be no more calls arrived each time with a fresh sting. She sought solace in routine, establishing new rituals to replace the old. Each morning, she walked the same route Elena had once taken to school, tracing familiar sidewalks, greeting shop owners who remembered her daughter's shy smile. She paused at the bus stop, her fingers brushing the cool metal of the memorial plaque, whispering a greeting, a promise. These walks became meditations, a way of stitching the past into the present, of refusing erasure while embracing continuity. Gradually, others joined her. Neighbors, co-workers, strangers who had followed the case from afar began walking alongside, drawn by a shared sense of reverence. Conversations unfolded quietly, stories exchanged, connections forged in the shadow of loss. What began as solitary remembrance evolved into a modest procession, a weekly ritual that transformed grief into community, solitude into solidarity. In those steps, Rosa discovered a fragile, sustaining purpose, a way to carry Elena forward without being consumed by her absence. For the detectives, the aftermath proved equally complex. Some retreated into silence, their emotional reserves depleted by years of relentless pursuit. Others immersed themselves in new cases with renewed fervor, determined to apply hard-won lessons before time could conspire against justice once more. Late-night meetings became common, their conversations ranging from technical refinements to philosophical reflection, from the mechanics of forensic genealogy to the psychological toll of prolonged uncertainty. In those exchanges, they acknowledged a truth often left unspoken, that solving a case did not restore equilibrium, but instead introduced a new form of disquiet, a persistent awareness of how much suffering had been compressed into a single file. One investigator, haunted by the decades Elena's family had spent waiting, initiated a program dedicated to supporting relatives of missing persons, pairing them with counselors trained in long-term grief and ambiguity. The initiative offered practical guidance, emotional support, and a sense of continuity, recognizing that unresolved loss constituted a distinct form of trauma. The program grew quickly, drawing participants from across the region, its framework replicated in neighboring states. In this way, Elena's legacy extended beyond the boundaries of her case, shaping new structures of care and resilience. As months passed, the city's attention drifted toward new crises, new headlines, new narratives demanding urgency. Yet occasionally, a familiar face appeared in the news. Rosa speaking at a conference, a detective presenting at a symposium, a lawmaker citing Elena's case during debate. These moments served as reminders that beneath the surface of progress, the story continued to exert quiet influence, shaping decisions, guiding policy, inspiring persistence. Then, on a gray afternoon nearly a year after the verdict, a letter arrived at Rosa's door, its envelope bearing the return address of a correctional facility. Her hands trembled as she opened it, bracing herself for words she had both anticipated and dreaded. The letter was brief, its tone restrained, its sentences deliberate. Hargrove wrote of regret, of remorse, of the futility of apology. He acknowledged the pain he had inflicted, the life he had destroyed, the decades he had stolen. He claimed no absolution, offered no justification, only the stark admission that his actions had been irrevocable. Rosa read the letter once, then again, her emotions shifting between anger, sorrow, and an unexpected, fragile calm. She did not respond. Some wounds, she understood, required no dialogue, only distance. Yet the letter lingered in her thoughts, not as a gesture of reconciliation, but as a confirmation that the truth, once hidden, had finally been spoken aloud, its silence broken. In the broader community, Elena's story inspired a wave of artistic expression. Murals appeared on brick walls, their vibrant colors depicting her face framed by constellations and city lights. Poets wrote verses that wove her name into meditations on time and memory. Musicians composed elegies that drifted through neighborhood festivals and quiet cafes. These tributes transformed private grief into public art, ensuring that Elena's presence remained woven into the cultural fabric of the city, her life remembered not solely for its tragic end, but for its enduring resonance. Schools incorporated discussions of her case into curricula addressing civic responsibility and community safety, encouraging students to engage critically with concepts of justice, vulnerability, and perseverance. In classrooms, young voices debated ethical dilemmas, explored the complexities of technological surveillance, and reflected on the human cost of unresolved loss. For many, Elena's story became their first encounter with the realities of crime and consequence, shaping their understanding of empathy and accountability. Yet perhaps the most profound transformations occurred in quieter, less visible ways. Parents adjusted curfews. Friends lingered longer at bus stops. Neighbors became more attentive, more willing to intervene, to notice, to care. These subtle shifts, invisible to headlines and policy debates, reflected a collective recalibration of awareness, a recognition that safety was a shared responsibility, vigilance a communal duty. On the anniversary of Elena's disappearance, the candlelight vigil swelled once more, its numbers larger than in years past. Faces young and old gathered beneath the darkening sky, flames trembling in unison, their light casting soft halos across solemn expressions. Names were read, not only Elena's, but those of countless others whose fates remained unknown, a roll call of absence that underscored the enormity of unresolved loss. As the final candle flickered, a hush settled over the crowd, a moment of collective stillness in which grief, hope, and determination converged. Rosa stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She spoke not of vengeance or closure, but of memory, urging those gathered to carry these stories forward, to refuse the comfort of forgetting. She reminded them that behind every missing name lay a constellation of lives forever altered, and that remembrance, however painful, constituted an act of resistance against indifference. Her words drifted into the night, lingering in the cool air, settling into the hearts of those who listened. As the crowd dispersed, the city resumed its restless motion, traffic surging, neon signs flickering, the familiar rhythms of urban life reasserting themselves. Yet beneath that relentless movement, the echo of Elena's story endured, a quiet pulse threading through streets and memories alike. It whispered of fragility, of resilience, of the profound interconnectedness binding strangers through shared vulnerability. And though the cold case had been solved, its shadow remained, stretching across time, a testament to the enduring power of truth and the irreversible cost of its delay. In that shadow, Chicago continued to walk, carrying forward the lessons etched into its conscience, aware that every step, every choice, every moment of vigilance might one day determine whether another story would end in silence or in the hard-won light of revelation. The city had learned to live with the unanswered question, but it had never truly made peace with it. 29 winters had passed, and still, on certain nights, when the wind cut through the alleys and rattled the loose signs above boarded storefronts, Chicago seemed to whisper her name. The sound moved through cracked bricks and rusted fire escapes, slid beneath locked doors, lingered in dim kitchens where coffee grew cold, and drifted into bedrooms where people lay awake, staring at ceilings, remembering where they had been when the news first broke. The case had become a ghost woven into the rhythm of the city, an absence that refused to fade, a wound that never quite closed. For the family, time had not healed. It had only stretched the pain into a long, thin line, cutting quietly through decades. Her mother's hair had gone from black to silver, her father's back had curved under the weight of years, and the house where she had grown up now stood like a relic of another era, its walls still holding the echo of laughter that had vanished in 1996. In the hallway, the same framed photograph hung in its place, edges yellowed, glass slightly clouded. A frozen moment, a smile that never aged, a future that never arrived. Every anniversary reopened the wound. Every news story about a solved cold case sent a jolt through their chests, a brief, cruel surge of hope followed by familiar disappointment. They had learned to keep their expectations low, to shield themselves from the cycle of anticipation and heartbreak. And yet, the phone still sat beside the bed every night, volume turned up, waiting for a call that might never come. In police headquarters, the case file had thickened with age. Yellowed reports, brittle photographs, outdated lab results, and handwritten notes from detectives long retired or deceased lay stacked in boxes marked with fading ink. For years, it had gathered dust, passed from one storage shelf to another, surviving reorganizations, budget cuts, and shifting priorities. But cold cases have a way of resurfacing, pulled back into the light by new technology, fresh eyes, or a single stubborn investigator unwilling to let go. When the cold case unit reopened the file, it wasn't with optimism. It was with grim persistence, a quiet determination to exhaust every possibility, no matter how slim. The city had changed. The science had changed. And somewhere, hidden within the mass of forgotten details, there might still be a thread waiting to be pulled. They began with what remained, the evidence that had survived nearly 3 decades of storage. Clothing sealed in plastic, fibers trapped in envelopes, fragments of soil scraped from the soles of her shoes, a hair recovered from beneath a fingernail, too degraded at the time for meaningful analysis. Back in 1996, the technology had not existed to read the secrets locked inside its fragile strands.
Now it did.
In a sterile lab humming with fluorescent light, technicians carefully extracted what little DNA remained. The process was slow, painstaking, and uncertain. Any contamination, any error, could destroy the sample forever. The room was silent except for the soft beeping of machines and the faint whisper of gloved hands moving across stainless steel surfaces. Days passed, then weeks. The city went on living, unaware that something monumental was unfolding in a room no larger than a classroom. When the results finally arrived, they did not bring immediate clarity. There was no match in the criminal databases. No sudden name.
No dramatic breakthrough.
Just a partial genetic profile, incomplete but promising, a ghost of a person who had once been close enough to touch her, to leave behind a trace. It was a start, but it was far from an answer. So the investigators turned to a new frontier, genetic genealogy. They uploaded the profile into public ancestry databases, searching not for the killer himself, but for distant relatives, cousins, second cousins,
Aunts.
uncles, strangers linked by invisible threads of blood. It was a method that had cracked some of the most notorious cold cases in recent history, but it was also slow, complex, and fraught with ethical and legal challenges. Names began to appear on the screen. Hundreds at first, then dozens, then a handful. Family trees were constructed and dismantled, rebuilt and revised, each branch traced backward through decades of births, marriages, and deaths. Investigators followed paper trails across states, across generations, across forgotten towns, and erased neighborhoods. The process was less like science and more like archaeology, digging through layers of human history in search of a single face. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the search narrowed. One family line stood out. A cluster of distant relatives connected to a man who had lived in Chicago in the mid-1990s. A man whose name appeared briefly in the original investigation, then vanished. He had been interviewed once, casually, as a peripheral witness. He had provided an alibi that was never fully verified. He had moved away shortly afterward, leaving behind little more than a forwarding address that led nowhere. Now, decades later, he was no longer a ghost. He was a living, breathing person with a job, a home, a family of his own. He had built a life on top of a buried past, blending seamlessly into the fabric of another city, another community. To his neighbors, he was unremarkable, polite, quiet, the kind of man you might nod to in passing, never suspecting the weight of secrets he carried. Surveillance began quietly,
Discreetly. No flashing lights. No confrontations.
just patient observation. Investigators tracked his routines, his movements, his habits. They waited for a moment when he might discard something personal, a coffee cup, a cigarette butt, a napkin. Anything that could provide a fresh DNA sample for direct comparison. It took weeks. Then, one evening, he tossed a half-empty soda can into a public trash bin outside a convenience store. An officer retrieved it moments later, sealing it in evidence packaging with practiced care. The lab worked through the night. The match was undeniable. The genetic profile from the crime scene aligned with the DNA from the discarded can. The probability of coincidence was infinitesimal. After 29 years, the shadow had a name, a face, an address. But evidence, even strong evidence, was only the beginning. The case had to be rebuilt from the ground up, reconstructed with modern standards, capable of surviving the scrutiny of courtrooms and defense attorneys. Investigators returned to old witnesses, now elderly, some battling illness, others struggling to recall events blurred by time. They revisited locations that no longer existed, stood in empty lots where buildings once stood, studied aerial photographs and faded maps, attempting to recreate the city as it had been in 1996. They uncovered inconsistencies in the suspects' original statements. Small discrepancies. Timelines that didn't quite align. A missing hour here. An unexplained detour there. Individually, they meant little. Together, they formed a pattern that tightened like a noose. Financial records revealed stress. Employment files showed instability. Personal letters hinted at volatile relationships and a temper that flared without warning. A former coworker, contacted after years of silence, recalled a cryptic comment made shortly after her disappearance, a joke that had seemed tasteless at the time, now chilling in retrospect. Some people just vanish, he had said, smirking. Like they were never here. Each discovery added weight. Each detail pressed harder against the fragile barrier of deniability. Yet the man continued his daily life, unaware that the walls were closing in. He went to work. He greeted his neighbors. He paid his bills. And every night, somewhere deep beneath the surface, a long-buried memory stirred. The arrest came quietly.
No sirens. No spectacle.
Plainclothes officers approached him in the parking lot outside his apartment complex, badges flashing briefly in the afternoon light. His face drained of color as they spoke his name. For a moment, he seemed frozen, caught between flight and surrender. Then his shoulders sagged, and he allowed himself to be led away. Word spread quickly. News alerts lit up phones across the city. Headlines exploded across screens. Chicago 1990, 6 cold case solved. Suspect arrested after 29 years. Family learns the truth. The shock rippled outward, touching those who had long forgotten the case and those who had never stopped remembering. In the interrogation room, under harsh fluorescent lights, the man sat in silence. A paper cup of water trembled slightly in his hand. The detectives laid out the evidence methodically, piece by piece, constructing a wall of facts impossible to ignore. The DNA, the timelines, the inconsistencies, the witness statements. The room seemed to shrink as the weight of it settled in. At first, he denied everything.
Flatly.
Predictably, he claimed coincidence.
Mistake.
Misinterpretation. But denial is a fragile thing when confronted by science, and as the hours passed, his resistance began to crumble.
His voice faltered.
His eyes darted. His breathing grew shallow. And then, in a moment that would echo across decades, he spoke words that had been locked inside him since the night everything ended. The confession was fragmented, disjointed, laced with fear and regret. He described a chance encounter that spiraled out of control, a confrontation that turned violent, a decision made in panic, and a desperate attempt to erase the consequences. His voice wavered as he recounted the final moments, the weight of a body, the silence that followed, the realization that there was no way back. For the investigators, it was a grim culmination. For the city, a collective intake of breath. And for the family, a truth they had both longed for and dreaded. When the call finally came, it was early morning. The sun had barely risen, casting pale light through the curtains of a house that had waited nearly 3 decades for this moment. The phone rang, sharp and insistent, slicing through sleep. Her mother answered with trembling hands. On the other end, a voice spoke the words she had imagined 1,000 times, yet never believed she would hear. The case had been solved. An arrest had been made. A confession obtained. After 29 years, there were answers. She listened in silence, tears streaming down her face as the details unfolded. Each sentence landed like a blow and a release all at once. Grief surged, raw and immediate, mingled with a strange, hollow relief. The unknown had finally been named, but the loss remained, as heavy as ever. In that quiet house, memories flooded back. Birthday candles, school recitals, late-night conversations. The sound of her daughter's laughter echoing down the hallway. The weight of those memories pressed against the reality of what had been stolen, and the space between them felt unbearable. Outside, the city carried on, unaware of the private earthquake unfolding behind closed doors. Cars moved through traffic. Trains rumbled along their tracks. Strangers passed one another on sidewalks, each carrying their own burdens, their own secrets. But somewhere, in a small living room, a family sat in stunned silence, holding on to one another, suspended between past and present, grief and closure. The cold case was no longer cold, but its shadow, long and heavy, still stretched across the years, reminding everyone who heard its story that time does not erase, that memory does not fade, and that some truths, no matter how deeply buried, will always find their way back to the surface. The days that followed the arrest unfolded in a strange, suspended state, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Court documents were filed. Evidence was cataloged. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse, their cameras trained on doors that remained stubbornly closed. Every detail of the case, once buried, now resurfaced under the relentless glare of public scrutiny. Old photographs appeared on evening broadcasts. Grainy footage from the 1990s replayed on loop. Headlines pulsed across screens, each one reminding Chicago that a chapter it thought long forgotten had been violently reopened. For the family, there was no such thing as distance or detachment. Each update struck with surgical precision, reopening wounds that had never fully healed. They were summoned to meetings with prosecutors, ushered into sterile conference rooms where case files lay stacked like bricks, each page carrying a fragment of the nightmare they had lived for nearly 3 decades. Detectives spoke in calm, measured tones, outlining timelines, presenting evidence, explaining legal procedures, but every word seemed to echo in a hollow chamber, muffled by shock and exhaustion. They learned details they had never known: the exact route her final walk had taken, the last verified sighting, the precise window of time in which everything had gone wrong. Each revelation brought clarity, but also unbearable pain, forcing them to imagine moments they had once only feared. Her mother struggled to remain seated as the narrative unfolded, fingers clenched around a tissue, eyes fixed on a point beyond the far wall, as though staring directly into the past. The confession, transcribed and dissected, read like a bleak script. It described a sequence of events stripped of emotion, a mechanical account of violence that contrasted sharply with the chaos it had unleashed. The suspect spoke of panic, of losing control, of fear, but his words felt thin, inadequate, incapable of matching the magnitude of what had been taken. No explanation could bridge the chasm between a life lived and a life erased. Outside the family's home, reporters waited, hoping for a statement, a reaction, a glimpse of grief. They came in waves, microphones extended, questions overlapping in a relentless barrage. The family declined to speak, retreating behind closed doors, choosing silence over spectacle. Their mourning was not a performance. It was a private reckoning, unfolding in quiet rooms heavy with memory. Across the city, the case sparked conversations long dormant. In cafes and office break rooms, on late-night talk shows and morning radio programs, people revisited the summer of 1996, recalling where they had been when the news first broke. Some remembered seeing her face on flyers stapled to lampposts. Others recalled candlelight vigils held in church basements and school gymnasiums. For many, the resolution of the cold case was both vindication and indictment, a testament to perseverance, but also a reminder of how easily a life could vanish into bureaucratic limbo. In police headquarters, the atmosphere was somber, tempered by a muted sense of accomplishment. Detectives who had spent years poring over the file finally saw their work culminate in tangible results, yet there was no celebration. Too much time had passed. Too much suffering had accumulated. The victory, if it could be called that, felt incomplete, overshadowed by the permanence of loss. Younger investigators, many of whom had not yet been born when the crime occurred, listened as veterans recounted the early days of the case. They spoke of chaotic searches, of door-to-door canvassing, of tip lines overwhelmed by false leads and desperate hopes. They remembered the weight of public expectation, the pressure to produce answers in a city already scarred by violence. They spoke of sleepless nights, of faces that haunted their dreams, of the quiet shame that lingered when the trail finally went cold. Now, standing on the far side of resolution, they confronted a different burden, the knowledge that justice delayed is justice diminished. Even as the system finally moved, it could not restore what had been stolen. It could not give her back her voice, her future, her chance to grow old. The legal process advanced with measured inevitability. Arraignment, pretrial hearings, motions filed and contested. Each step stretched the family's endurance, forcing them to relive the story again and again. In court, they sat behind the prosecution, eyes fixed on the defendant, searching for something: remorse, recognition, a flicker of humanity. Mostly, they found emptiness, averted gazes, rigid posture, a man sealed inside his own silence. During one hearing, the prosecution played excerpts from the interrogation. The audio crackled through courtroom speakers, filling the space with a voice that had once spoken to her, perhaps casually, perhaps kindly, before turning lethal. The sound seemed to vibrate in the air, a haunting reminder of how thin the line between ordinary life and irreversible tragedy can be. Her mother pressed her hands over her ears, shaking, while her father stared forward, jaw clenched, refusing to look away. Witnesses took the stand. Former coworkers, old acquaintances, forensic experts. Each added a fragment to the mosaic, reconstructing a night long dissolved by time. Their testimonies formed a relentless cascade of detail, stripping away ambiguity, leaving only stark, brutal clarity. The jury listened in tense silence, pens poised, absorbing a story that felt both distant and immediate, historical and horrifyingly present. Beyond the courtroom, the community grappled with the implications. Trust, once broken, proved difficult to restore. Neighbors of the accused reevaluated years of casual interactions, wondering how they had failed to see the darkness beneath the surface of normalcy. Parents held their children a little tighter. Doors were locked a little earlier. The familiar streets of Chicago seemed subtly altered, shadows lengthening where certainty once stood. And yet, amid the unease, there was also a fragile sense of solidarity. Vigils were held in her memory, candles flickering against the night, their collective glow pushing back the darkness. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder, united by grief and resolve, by a shared understanding that remembrance was an act of resistance against oblivion. Her name was spoken aloud, again and again, refusing to let it fade. For the family, these gatherings were both comfort and torment. Each flame represented compassion, but also underscored the scale of what had been lost. They listened as speakers recounted her kindness, her ambition, her laughter, piecing together a portrait of a young woman frozen forever in time. The stories stitched together a life truncated, offering glimpses of who she had been and who she might have become. Late at night, alone with their thoughts, they confronted a quieter, more complicated reality. Closure, they discovered, was not a single moment of catharsis, but a slow, uneven process. Some days, the truth brought a measure of peace. Other days, it intensified the pain, transforming abstract uncertainty into concrete horror. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of unanswered questions and irreversible endings. Her bedroom remained untouched. Posters still lined the walls. A collection of cassette tapes and handwritten notes sat neatly arranged on a shelf, artifacts of a vanished era. Dust settled softly on surfaces rarely disturbed, as though time itself moved cautiously in that space, unwilling to intrude. Occasionally, her mother would step inside, breathing in the faint, lingering scent of perfume, tracing the edges of objects that had once been part of a daily routine. Each visit felt like crossing a fragile boundary between then and now. In the broader narrative of the city, the case became a symbol, a testament to the enduring power of persistence, technology, and human resolve. Cold case units across the country cited it as evidence that no file should ever be truly closed, that even the faintest trace might one day yield answers. But behind the headlines and professional accolades lay a story far more intimate, defined not by procedural triumph, but by human cost. The trial loomed, a looming confrontation between past and present. Prosecutors prepared meticulously, aware that decades-old cases posed unique challenges. Memories faded, evidence degraded, witnesses aged. Yet the DNA, silent and impartial, anchored the case, offering an unassailable link across time. It stood as both a beacon of truth and a stark reminder that science, unlike memory, does not forget. As the date approached, tension coiled tighter. The family braced themselves for the ordeal ahead, steeling their hearts for weeks of testimony, for the relentless dissection of a life lost, for the public airing of private anguish. Friends and relatives gathered in support, forming a protective circle, offering meals, childcare, quiet companionship. In these small acts of kindness, the family found moments of relief, fleeting but essential. On the eve of the trial, her mother sat alone in the living room, the house hushed around her. She held the framed photograph taken decades earlier, studying the familiar contours of a face frozen in youth. She whispered apologies for the years of unanswered prayers, for the nights spent waiting, for the birthdays marked by absence. The room seemed to listen, absorbing each word, each tear, as though bearing witness to a grief too vast for language. Outside, the city pulsed with life, unaware of the intimate vigil unfolding behind those walls. Traffic hummed. Neon signs flickered. Somewhere, laughter spilled from a bar, mingling with the distant wail of sirens. The world moved forward, indifferent and relentless, while one family lingered at the intersection of memory and loss. When dawn finally broke, pale light crept through the curtains, illuminating the quiet resolve etched into weary faces. They gathered their coats, their documents, their courage, and stepped into a day that would test every fragile defense they had built. The courthouse awaited, its stone facade impassive, a monument to law and order, and to the slow, grinding machinery of justice. As they crossed the threshold, the weight of history pressed close. 29 years of waiting converged in that moment, condensing into a single, trembling breath. Whatever the outcome, the truth had emerged, irrevocable and unyielding. The cold case had yielded its secrets, but the echoes of its violence would linger, reverberating through lives forever altered. And somewhere, beneath the layers of procedure and protocol, beneath the headlines and public discourse, a quieter narrative persisted, a story of endurance, of love stretched across decades, of a promise kept not to forget. It was this story, more than any verdict, that defined the true legacy of the case, a testament to the enduring human capacity to seek light in the deepest darkness.